How Comic Hour with your hosts, Andrew Glonner
and Chris Ramos.
Holy macaroni, folks. We got a title for you. This is Miracleman by Alan Moore.
The original writer.
The original writer. And the reason why I paused at that is he has some history with this book. And we'll get started into that. But I guess one of the points to this book was, why did we choose this book? Why did we choose Miracleman? You may have not heard of this book unless you are kind of tied to the comic book community. He looks very much like Shazam or Captain Marvel with the white cape and red suit with like a thunderbolt through it. And I kind of picked this book because it's been sitting on my shelf. I've heard so much history to this character and just how riveting it was. And it's Alan Moore, but this is also the same guy who wrote Watchmen. But he wrote this way before that happens, like 4 years before Watchmen comes out in 1982. So this was like, oh, wow. Okay. So he was really cutting his teeth on this book. And he's such a big writer and everything. So why doesn't he want his name tied to this book? Yeah. We'll get into that.
Yeah, I would say yes, to be answered, right? And the character Miracleman, again, I mean, years and years and years, decades ago, was very popular. Everyone knew that character.
Yep.
It's just one of those comic book guys that has gone by the wayside, and it's not because of anything maybe that the story did wrong. It's just sometimes there's just some internal strife, and characters get put to the thinking shelf, or put off and stop going into publication. And Miracleman kind of talks a little bit about the idea of what happens when a superhero is put on pause. And I think that's kind of exactly what happened to the character and exactly what happened to the comic.
Yeah.
From the 50s. For one reason or another, it was put on pause, and it's only so long before the public stops thinking about it.
Right. So Miracleman, or what his first name was, Marvel Man, his first appearance was in Marvel Man 25, or some sort of start off of that, in 1954 or 53. Kind of depends where you're looking, if he starts in the comic book strips or in his own title. That history's a little, you could kind of compare and contrast.
Yeah, you can take it one way.
Yeah, by Fawcett Publications. And so what happened was Captain Marvel, Shazam, was coming out, but the publisher gave up the rights to it. They didn't want to extend it. They just wanted to let it expire. And so the people around in the comic book industry was like, well, let's do our own. Mick Engel was like, yeah, I'll do my own.
Yeah, Captain Marvel was pretty popular. Shazam was popular. Billy Batson was popular. A lot of that storyline had built such a little side cult following.
Yep. And it was, L. Miller and Son, LTD, who kind of first published it. And they're kind of like an offshoot with some ties like DC and things like that. So they're all kind of in the same circle of influence and whatnot. So they're putting out this title, and they said, yeah, let's go for it. And it was really similar to Captain Marvel, where he says a magic word like Shazam. What was it?
Yes. Miracleman?
Yes.
He says Kimota. Which is backwards atomic.
Yes. And he gets his powers through that way. He just starts out as an ordinary guy, says Kimota, comes right back as a superhero. But the thing was different than Shazam was he was a magic based versus Miracleman, where he's more atomic based. That was the argument with it.
So they tried to sort of break outside of that. The colorings, actually, even some of those indicative 50s and
40s, 60s, yeah.
I mean, it's blue, yellow, and red. It's really all that they could print at the time.
Yeah.
So they just did different combinations on the pages of those colors. But his whole body is blue. He has a red belt with little yellow circles in there. Sort of very Spider-Man, very Superman. But his boots have these cuffs on them, almost like Captain America a little bit.
Oh yeah, that's true. So yeah, and then they gave him, like Captain Marvel, they gave him a family to interact off of. So there's Miracle Man himself. Then there's young Miracle Man. I know we're really going places with these names. And then Kid Miracle. And so there's Ramos was saying, there's blue, there's a red jumpsuit and a yellow jumpsuit.
And it's like the cliche sidekicks.
Yeah.
The little like the boys that are running along with him and doing that.
Yeah.
But they were all super powered in that sense. So they all really were, Alan Moore kind of plays on this a little bit. They were just running around feeling totally, totally invulnerable.
Yep, they felt invincible. They were going up against all these bad guys like in the 50s and everything, and just really at the top of the game. And then all of a sudden they went up against this spaceship, and the spaceship blows up.
Out in space.
And then they disappear. They kind of died off, and people didn't know if they're alive, they're dead, but they were just not seen. And that's where Alan Moore kind of that was inspiration, was when the comic left off in 1963. What was that last adventure they had, maybe, or his own adventure, maybe that wasn't written, or it was just a concept, and he was like, oh, I could take that and really work that idea. So he came up with this, and we see the character of Miracle Man encounter that, and his alter identity, Michael Moran, kind of wake up one day. He's he's a middle-aged guy. I think he's in probably his 40s.
Yeah, I'd say that.
Yeah, maybe late 30s. Yeah, late 30s, 40s. Just starting. He has he has a stable relationship with Liz, and one day he keeps telling Liz about his dreams. He's like, I was super powerful. I was flying through the sky, and I had a family that I was with.
And this is Alan Moore, it's saying, okay, everyone remembers him going into space and sort of ending from there. And again, this is kind of that meta moment where it's like comic book writers oftentimes look for those hidden years, or the lost years, or lost moments, or
that space in between.
Yeah. Like sometimes a comic book character will be like, all right, I'm going to go out in space, and 2 years later they return, and then they just go on with their lives. Well, that's like a perfect moment for comic book writers to be like, I will write what happened in those 2 years, and I'm going to fill in the gaps. And I can see where it was intriguing for Alan Moore to say, you know what, I'm going to take this character that not many people knew about in the 80s when he wrote this.
Yeah.
And not many people they somewhat remembered the character, right? But they may not have known all the intricacies of it. And Alan Moore said, let me write this character, let me make it my own, and let me give you a bang up story that's going to really cement this as a new way to look at comic book characters. Because I think he had a
few strips that he was doing in some of the British magazines at the time, and in 1981 for it was a magazine called Warrior. And this is when comics were in magazines, and that it was very kind of a niche title. It was kind of underground. And he said, let's approach Alan Moore with it. So he seems like he's a pretty good, smart writer, he's all right, And this is before all of his big successes. I think he was doing a little bit of Doctor Who, maybe, or some shorts and that. And I'm like, yeah, let's try him.
The cool part about this too is that Miracle Man, his human character, you're trying to piece all this together as you're reading it. Like, okay, so you're the human named Michael.
Yes.
And he's reliving these fever dreams that he's had. And he's telling his girlfriend about him. And then he starts remembering these keywords, and just like Shazam, and just like some of those at the time, he's relating all this to her, and he ends up transforming.
Yes.
Because he remembers his atomic word.
Yeah. And I guess this is a good, moment to explain what are his powers. If we were to say, what are Miracle Man's powers?
Yeah.
He can fly. He's super strong. I don't think he does energy blasts, but he has like maybe an energy field about him.
Yeah, like they touched on that a little bit.
Yeah.
That there's something that's keeping him from just flying through the planet or something.
Yeah.
Part of it too is, if you have super speed, you have to have super strength with it.
Yes.
So he's got both of
yeah,
those.
he's got both those. And I think he's got super hearing because he can hear from really far away when somebody's coming at him.
And
Yeah, what
I
would we
feel
cover?
like,
Yeah,
like we said,
invulnerability.
he's not powered by the sun, or he's not
No.
powered by something. He has his own, like he sparkles a little bit.
Yeah.
He's like a blonde haired, like really, he seems quite tall at times too.
Sure.
Like, I mean,
Yeah.
literally, he's like standing next to other people. He's like 7 feet tall.
Right.
But he's something of a perfect being.
Yes. And I think the most important powers for me that stood out was his super strength. He was really strong compared to anyone around him. And then he was invulnerable.
Yeah.
And that was a big plot moment. There's a big thing with that.
Yeah, pretty much fire, and even flying out into space, like, doesn't bother him. So
right. I mean, they survived like an atomic bomb.
Yeah, it's pretty strong.
Nuclear bomb.
So bullets and things. And actually, he makes a comment one time where he's like, "I can just walk through this cardboard life of or this world of paper that humans build around them."
Yeah.
Which was really neat to think of that, because a lot of superheroes will punch a wall or kick it or something. He just walks through it and it just crumbles around him.
Right.
He's just like, doesn't have to be flamboyant about it. It just sort of
is.
Yeah.
Yep.
He just could literally just keep walking and nothing will stand in its way, kind of thing.
Absolutely. So then, like, after he reawakens, he hasn't shifted into Miracleman, and I think they say it's like 16 to 18 years.
18 years.
Yep. Yeah. So when he comes back to Miracleman, he has all these triggered memories that come back from that 18-year gap of like, this is what happened last time when I was Miracleman, and he's having like a crisis of like a culture shock moment. He's like, I can remember all these things. What's happening? What's going on around me? And they're like, well, you're here. We're in a relationship. I'm still here. And he still remembers all of his memories, but the way he's talking, he talked about like being Miracleman to his girlfriend. She didn't believe him.
No, she's like, I mean, she realized that it was a different person. And that's why at some parts, and I'll talk about the artwork later, but in some parts, the artwork kind of fails because Michael Moran and Miracleman, they do look similar.
Right.
And so at first you kind of lose track, like, is this a totally different being, or is it just like him transformed a little?
Right.
Like, did he become like a sort of demigod of himself, or is he actually like a totally different superhero? Like, at least with Shazam, he went from a boy to
like a superhero guy,
to a giant superhero guy that didn't look anything like the boy. So it's like,
and that might have been its own commentary.
Yeah, I mean, it was just a little too close for me to be like, all right, what's exactly happening? And they do touch on it a little bit, but at first it's a confusing moment.
Right.
And when he's talking to Liz and he's telling her about, in 1950, Johnny Bates joined us, and he was, Kid Miracleman, and then we had another guy whose name was it Dickie Dauntless?
Dickie Dauntless, yep.
And she's like, are you serious? This isn't real.
Yeah.
And so it's kind of funny because some of the ways that he explained what they did in the 50s, like,
going up against all these bad guys and things like that.
Yeah, he says, we go up, we were all playing a game which neither side took too seriously. Dr. Gargunzo would fight us. The Firebug fought us. Young Nasty Man fought us. And she's like, are you making this up? Because in the 50s, when comics were written, it was a way
golden
simpler time, and they didn't have to try to come up with anti-heroes or these sort of
complex
sub-villains. They were just like, this is a bad scientist and he punches things, and
like a villain of the week kind of deal.
Like, you're a superhero and you punch harder, and they're end of story.
Right.
So they just gave them all these throwaway names.
Right.
And their adventures were just a way to escape So it was just a fun way.
Yeah.
And, I think this book did a really good job of tying in like what the comics of the 40s and 50s and 60s were doing, and then
Yes.
just how much
The culture shifted.
culture
The
was,
industry.
like the 80s. Like now, this book written by Alan Moore in the 80s has to reflect an 80s level threat
Yeah.
and 80s type of villains and 80s expectations of society. So it's kind of sad on one end of like just how much our society has was so naive, I guess, and
Yeah.
then how much has changed in the last 50 years.
Sure.
So
Yeah.
it's kind of weird.
That's a very coming of age thing, but also like the commenting on the industry getting serious because Vertigo is starting to come out too, or at least this is like early beginnings. And even though this isn't like a DC owned title, like, and Alan Moore wasn't writing quite his landmark stories yet, those ideas in that inception was starting to happen.
Well, it's all getting more
it's
serious.
underground too. Yeah.
I mean, The Dark Knight Returns was in the 80s. It's like, so there's so much that was changing in the comic
Something
books.
was in the water.
Yeah,
especially in British water.
Yes. They all wanted to kick it up a little bit and make it more serious.
Make it more adult because they were seeing, I think, what was it? The people in the 50s and 60s were growing up.
Yeah. I mean, yeah.
And they wanted to reach more adult audiences. And
40 years later, like, how do you hang on to that 8-year-old that was reading the comics?
Yeah.
You grow the comics with him. Well, unfortunately, it was a rough time. So so they're like, all right, we're gonna write this just as rough.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's Alan Moore wanted a story to tell, especially for those adults that are a little more mature reads. So absolutely. And so now that we've established his power set, we'll keep going. But so Miracleman, he finds out, he kind of reawakens and he goes, where's young Miracleman? Where's Kid Miracle? I don't know anybody about that. And then they kind of he runs across after doing some research that Kid Miracle's still alive. Johnny Bates.
Johnny Bates.
What is he doing?
Perfectly weird name.
Yeah. So he finds out he's like a multi-billionaire or millionaire, I guess, in that day was that. He has a big skyscraper building. He's really ahead in the technology field. And so he goes, oh, okay. Hey, let's go pay him a visit. See how he's doing. Oh, okay. So they go over to meet Johnny Bates, and he's probably in his 30s, probably late 30s, starting, it's very far in his career though. Goes up, says, oh, how's it going? And it's like a reunion between buds and catching up. It's like, oh, hey, you're back. Cool. Yeah, I just got my memories and things like that. And then he goes, hey, where's young Miracleman? Oh, he died.
Yeah.
So you're like, oh, okay. He never made it back from that blast. Oh, okay. That's unfortunate. All right.
I'm just a guy.
Yeah.
Moving on.
Right. And so they have like a very serious conversation, and all of a sudden a couple like trigger words just set off Dickie Dauntless into becoming this evil character. And we find out that's one of our first villains we encounter is the villain dragon.
Yeah. And it's kind of neat because on one side, Miracleman, as his human form, Michael, just is like getting this itch, like something isn't right. You seem like you're lying. You seem like something's going on,
Yeah.
And you could tell that Johnny Bates had grown up into this snotty, privileged businessman.
Right.
But he has this like weirdo, like serial killer edge to him.
Yeah.
And it was like,
well, first you're like,
awkward.
oh, it's Tony Stark, right? He's Iron Man, right?
Yeah,
he's kind of, he has that persona.
He has
that persona to him that he carries himself with. And then you just see the corruption start to really come in. And you find out instead of Michael forgetting how to use his powers or just having this empty blank period, he never had that. He grew up with his powers. He never untransformed.
He never said his magic words to put the superhero away.
Right. So he would he abandoned, which is another theme, was abandoning his humanity.
Well, and right. Like, like wanting to be above everyone and then
or being lesser than that.
Well, yeah, I mean, the way I looked at it was like, what if you had superpowers and you were helping the world, and then you were like, well, I'm done helping them. Well, you still have your superpowers, right?
Yeah.
So how many years would go by before you sort of start getting this like tainted look at the world and being like,
Oh,
I'm
yeah.
better than everybody?
Right.
And so then I think that's what happened to him. He was just like, I don't have to like, bow down to anyone.
Sure.
Like, I can.
Yeah, he had that like God complex.
Yeah.
about
So
him, yeah.
you start building that. And I would imagine after, almost 20 years, he just was sort of corrupted by his own power.
Yeah.
And
Which makes sense in that perspective as well.
And at the time, he thought everyone else had died. Like,
yeah.
he thought he was the last.
Yeah,
one
he thought he was the
standing.
last one. Yeah, so he had no rival either, or nobody
Right.
to keep him in check or check on him, or
no one to
relate to either.
Yeah, no one to talk to or fight with him. So he just started probably doing these small things, and then realized, well, I can get away with anything.
Why transform back into who I was? I could just
a boy.
Why do I want to go be back to that?
And here's the other thing: Miracleman never aged. He came back as Miracleman, which was already like a full-grown adult guy.
Yeah, I guess that's another thing that establishes when they're transformed, they never age.
Yes. So then he's
or I guess in the 50s and 60s they never aged, but like when we went to Dragon, like Dragon aged that whole 18.
Time. Yeah. So now he's wondering like, why did you age? That's weird.
Yeah.
I guess it's just because they never put him back.
Yeah. Exactly.
Or maybe they did age, but they were only that superhero for a little bit.
Yeah. True.
It's like
he was like in his teens.
Yeah.
He was the young teen sidekick.
Yeah, it's like living a 6-hour day, and then putting that persona back in the closet. Or
right. Yeah. So that was wild. You're like, wow, his former sidekick turned into be this villain. And it turned out that now that he was alive during all that time, he mastered his powers, whereas Miracleman never had that opportunity. He was good, but he didn't master his powers. So he is so much more powerful than Miracleman. And he just almost beats the snot out of him.
Yeah, he pretty much does.
Pretty close to, being the end of your Miracleman. He pounds the crap out of him. And until like he gets so infueled in his power in this brawl that's just, it goes forever until like in his own words of getting things, explaining what was going on, he accidentally says Miracleman, and that's his trigger word. Not Kimota.
Kid Miracleman.
No, but I think it's just regular Miracleman. That's the word. That's his magic word.
He said Miracleman, my name, his magic word.
Yes. So when Kid Miracle says Miracleman, he transforms. And that's why, through his own hubris, he says that. And he becomes this kid again. And he hasn't been that kid in like 20 years.
Now, here's the other thing as far as themes go and like how Alan Moore's writing it, is that I'm not sure. I mean, maybe here and there. But before this comic, I don't know if a sidekick has ever turned on their
evil, kind of like that
so much,
right?
Like maybe a sidekick was like, I'm done with you, but like this is straight up like they're trying to destroy each other.
Yeah,
and that may have been because that's
pretty cutting edge.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of these themes in here is like Alan Moore sort of stretching his wings, and then also people being like, "This has never been done before." Because
it would be a while before Red Hood would come along, right?
Oh yeah. Oh yeah, quite some time. So
because I remember that, and that's kind of a similar situation, but he doesn't go full 180.
Death of the Family was many years later.
Yeah, that was end of the decade. Yeah.
So I think that this was, again, going back to sidekicks from the 40s and 50s, there's jokes now that sidekicks don't want to be sidekicks, right? Like that was like, that's kind of a sky high kind of joke, right? But I think in the 40s and 50s, it was just a common accepted, like, hey, you got your buddy.
Everything's sunshine, rainbows.
You got your holy macaroni. You got
holy macaroni. Yes.
So that part was what I was trying to think of. Like, why is he writing these themes in here? It's because they're definitely recurring ideas of like, how far can we push the envelope here?
Yeah. And it was an envelope indeed, like the amount of carnage and destroying like a whole city block, bringing down like these giant buildings in a town that's never seen anything like this.
Yeah.
It was huge. People never really recovered from it either. This town doesn't really recover from it. There's like memorials that are built to it and things like that. It was like, were you there when Dragon came or Kid Miracle came, when the gods fought? And it was like, people talk about that as like common folk. You're like, oh, okay, that was a big thing for them.
And I want to touch on another little theme here where when Miracleman is Miracleman, I mean, he's like a Greek god pretty much, right? Well, Liz, his girlfriend, I mean, she's just as enamored with him as anyone else. So
who wouldn't be?
yeah. And it's like, I think that that's sort of going back into these are common themes in modern comics, but maybe not at the time of like, what's your home life like? Yeah. When you are transformed into a powerful superhero and then you go back to human, how does your girlfriend see you differently? Like it's sort of like, oh, it's you.
And she met him after the atomic bomb went off on the family. So he was just an average guy when they met. And so she never knew about Miracleman, his other persona.
Yeah.
And so when that did happen, we were talking about, she couldn't take him seriously and whatnot. And then when he does transform, she's like kind of afraid. Well, first she's enamored, but then also afraid at the same time.
Well, because she sees that even when he comes back as a human, he thinks of himself as a lesser person.
Yeah.
So it's like he's sort of broken on that.
Yeah, because she turned out to be more in love with Miracleman than Michael or Mickey, you want to call him. And so she is having this hard time adjusting. And eventually, he, as Miracleman, tried to, because almost like his confidence changes, his mannerisms change, and all of a sudden, before you know it, they're pregnant with a child.
Yeah.
So that was like, whoa, okay. And then that big situation of whose kid is it?
Yeah.
That was such a huge thing he did there.
Such a wacky
concept.
Yeah. To be like, oh, I guess. I mean, it's me, but it's not me. I mean, it's Miracleman.
Yeah.
And then she's like, wait, so I have a superhero baby, and it's just like, okay, how do you handle that? Well, in typical Alan Moore fashion, we won't, I'll let you know, it's not for, this is a mature book. Mature reader's book.
Yes.
And that entire pregnancy era is off the charts. So
yes,
just be aware of this. It's storylines like that are interwoven into the main storyline. And the main storyline through almost the entire omnibus is, what is the real story of Miracleman? Like, where the heck did he come from? Who made him? Or how did he appear? Or what world is he from?
Exactly.
And that's just like, you would think. So there's 3 volumes in here. And Andrew and I were saying, okay, so volume 1 and 2 is pretty much like a standard superhero book.
Yeah, and I think you're right themes. With saying we're focusing. Well, first of all, you find out, you have to ask yourself, who is Miracleman? He answers that question. Then he goes, what are his origins? Yeah. Okay, so then he as Miracleman wants to find out where he came from.
And his origin in his brain is rooted on this comic book page.
Yes.
So he's like, I'm this comic book character. That's who I am.
Yeah, that's what he known his life to be.
Yeah.
And then the third thing Alan Moore's trying to say is, okay, now after everything's done, what does his future look like?
Yeah, like, what do you do in the earth? Like, what is your purpose here? Are you going to be like another Superman? Are you going to help people? He gets pretty he's already overpowered, and he has kind of a short fuse. So almost everything he does, I mean, just him casually slapping someone throws them, across football fields. So he does have to realize that he's way overpowered.
Sure.
So he does a little searching for his origin, and
there's aliens involved. And then there's we haven't even touched on his other main villain, Dr. Gargunza.
Yeah,
who is you take the most evil scientist and you probably push the envelope a little bit.
You
farther.
ramp him up a little.
Yeah, like Lex Luthor, he kind of seems tame compared to Dr. Gargunza. Basically, he he created Miracleman without him even knowing it. He was just a villain of the week, but he was so much more to him that Miracleman didn't even know about.
Well, and again, this is where Alan Moore starts pulling in characters that were already in the original comic and then saying, hey, I'm going to give all of them bigger backstories than they had before. And in a way, I'm kind of torn. Like, did Alan Moore take all of these original characters
from Mick Anglo,
and original memories and just things that people loved about that?
Right.
And did he sort of like, did he make his own story too much so that he's almost ruined the original versions? Like, I feel like the original versions had nothing to do with any of this.
Yeah, no.
Like, nothing. And then Alan Moore goes, he gets a little bit, adds a little more. And then in the book 3, I'm telling you, I don't know, he just like went off the rails. I think Alan Moore, it was in my mind, and to be honest, in my mind, it was just too much. It was just like, wow,
I'll say, we were talking about like so after you find out your origins, what do you do with yourself? How do you go about being a superhero? How do you approach that? And so he was looking at the future, and then he starts establishing and owning this utopia and gods among men concept, and really putting that out there. Basically, him and a collective team of newer heroes come together and said, hey, we have all the abilities, technology, strength, wisdom, intelligence to build a society out of our carnage that we left this town in. Let's build a society up and give everybody free money, eliminate the economy, threw that out the window. We gave everyone freedom, free money, and almost unlimited resources, and just trying to break every possible socioeconomic like barrier.
and sort of go into that. I don't know if that's a common theme now or something, but like sort of, every superhero wants to do
the best they can.
Yeah. And like a global change.
Yes. A global change. Yeah,
like, okay, there's only some characters, some superheroes are ground-based, and that's all they can do is just keep their own neighborhood safe. Like that's their full-time job.
Yeah.
Keep their neighborhood safe. And then you get characters like Miracleman and others that are like powered enough that they really could handle the entire world. Really. Yeah. So then they're like, all right, listen, I'm just going to put down some rules. Boom.
Yep.
No more economy, no more guns, no more nukes, no more. And
they take away all the big, huge weapons, the world and stuff.
And kind of build on that. There's parts in the story too, where I think I feel like they kind of put it together for sensationalism a little bit.
Yes.
Just to kind of do some fillers.
Yeah. And I think
fill some stuff
exactly. They wanted to tie up as many loose ends, I think, as they could for that time, because it was ending, and after restarting, I think, at another publisher, they're and a gap. They're like, hey, we got to finish the story. We got to start wrapping up. And so
maybe Alan Moore was ready to move on to other things.
That too.
Like, I feel like,
because I think it wraps in 86 or something like that.
Yeah.
Because then he starts getting like started on Watchmen and Swamp Thing. Because I think Swamp Thing was the next project. Then
they changed a few artists too, which are like jarring differences. Should we talk about that?
Yeah, let's go into the art. Absolutely. I know you've been dying to do it. So my favorite artist out of this one was Gary Leach. Gary Leach, when they start the book, is phenomenal. He does some of the boards and covers for the first series, and like the cover of like the Omnibus and stuff like that. This guy.
Yep.
And wow, I was very impressed. Very different from everything that was going on, but I think he was really underrated.
So.
And then Alan Davis. Alan Davis is more of a known, a popular artist. He comes along in like book 2.5.
Yeah, he jumps in later
Chuck
on.
Austen makes an appearance in 2 and 3. And there's a couple other notable artists that come through. and the coloring was done by Stephen Olaf. And we actually reviewed Swamp Thing, the Absolute Edition, and he did the recolors on that. So if you know what that recoloring looks like, this is what it was.
It's pretty much like that. Yeah. He kind of had the same style throughout.
Same style with that. And that's like a new school, old school thing. I appreciate for what it is. It's very eccentric and kind of makes it more psychedelic and over the top. They do a lot of experimental art in this as well. Nothing like too over the top, like some of the books we've talked on the podcast, but enough where they're really pushing the envelope and seeing what they can do.
So I give them props that, a lot of the pages have different breaking the barriers and different kind of like layouts and that the artwork gets grungy when it's supposed to, and it gets dirty when it needs to. And, when you feel like there's going to be something graphic or, some sort of like terror in there, it adds a lot. The thing is, so like the omnibus, like half of it is the story, the 3 volumes, and the other full half is like, like 400 pages.
We were talking about this. So
extras.
I think it was cool in this omnibus to collect all the extras and put them together. Some people are different because it's a smaller book, so maybe it's a little bit more affordable or things like that, or maybe it wasn't necessary. Or you could have put the Neil Gaiman stuff in it.
I think people were surprised because they maybe just didn't know about it ahead of time.
Yeah. I like all the covers that are in here and some of the original art.
Yes.
That was in it. And
even Neil Adams threw in something here. So here's my take is I think the artwork, again, just like Sandman, I'm not the biggest fan of the Sandman artwork.
Right.
But it matches the story and the decade at the time.
Sure.
But in here, it's sort of the same idea where some of the artwork really, really, in my mind, took away from the story so much that it's just like, ugh, this page looks terrible. So
I think, it's different tastes.
Yeah. Yeah. But in the back, they have all of the original sketches and pencils and stuff. And some of the pencils, I was like, you know what? These are solid pencils. I would rather read the comic in the pencils.
Yeah.
Almost.
They're that good.
By the time you get it colored and then you lose so much in the coloring. It's like, to me, it was so surprising that once they started adding the layers and layers of shadow and shades and gradients and they lost everything. Some of the characters, even I was comparing some pages, I was like, wow. I mean, like there's some that are just way more ominous as a pencil drawing.
Right.
And I just feel like once they colored it, you sort of, something was lost.
Yeah.
But what's the J. Michael Straczynski, the Rising Stars?
Yeah.
Rising Stars is a solid story, great writing. Like the artwork, I think, just did no justice to that story. So sometimes there's a disconnect, and like I said, I always say to each their own.
Absolutely.
But
I
would
think
say 20% of this I liked.
Sure.
As far as art goes.
Right. Well, I think they do a really good job with trying to illustrate the action, the intensity when Dragon and Miracleman are fighting, because that fight is like super huge, and Miracleman has to go through so many hoops to actually be able to fight him.
He has to dig deep and
exactly. So you want to show the scrungy, ominous city, and I think I appreciate the art for that. Now, maybe when they're at the home life or things like that, or maybe you could have did something a little bit different with that style. But again, it was a sign of the time too. At the time, it seemed like a really cool thing. Maybe if they were to go back and recolor it, or somebody wanted to redo it, or coloring today is so much different than it was.
Well, like sometimes you read comics and they're like, gosh, this looks like a 90s comic, you know? And
it's not stiff.
Yeah.
You can't say the coloring is stiff.
No.
The art stiff. Yeah.
No.
Because that's like 60s. 60s, you could argue it's stiff a bit.
There is movement in the pages.
Yep.
But some of the, just the single panels, where you're reading such big, eloquent like Alan Moore.
Oh, like the
blocks
prose,
of
yeah.
text of like, wow,
When it starts
like,
getting more prose,
yeah, like
absolutely.
he's really going at it here in like a, you know, high level literature.
Yeah.
And
We were
then
talking, we were
artwork
talking
is
book
so
3 is a little,
down.
book 3 is a little more prose than the other two. We'll say
Yeah.
that.
And some of the parts are like so black and so dark that you almost lose that there's like bodies in the card.
Sure.
You know, like you're like,
Yeah.
oh,
And that could be on
you're like-
purpose too, maybe. That's
Yeah,
what
you're
I was
like,
going for.
oh,
Yeah.
that pile is just a bunch of dead bodies.
Mhm.
And
Or illustrating the alien world, like that was very colorful.
yes.
So you had to show a lot. So that was very busy as well.
So then in the third volume, to sort of wrap all this up, is Miracleman wondering, you know, now that I've
Built it in
myself,
Yeah.
would I really ever need to go back to being Michael, the human?
yeah, when that
And
happened, yeah.
I did like that scene where he sort of like laid him to rest a little bit. Of like,
Yeah.
I'm going to change one more time, and I'm just going to stay changed.
Yeah,
right?
because he couldn't comprehend going back, or Michael couldn't, after, you know, his kid is born and things like that, what happens with her. We won't go into too much detail of that, but it kind of breaks his mind. He loses his relationship, the human ties that he had, and he doesn't. And after going to see aliens and gods and things like that, he's like, I don't want to be me anymore.
Yeah. Well, and I also think too, like you said, it was like if you're a human and you witness all of that.
Yeah.
Because he lived amongst
regular
and
people.
gods
Yeah,
for
exactly.
5 years or
And the
whatever.
common person, like,
Yeah.
was like, holy
And-
cow.
And if you are, as he says, Miracleman is a diamond with no flaws.
Yeah.
I mean, if you really are at that level, then there's going to take a moment where your human side is just holding you back.
Yes.
Because if you're going to change the world, literally change it, and, you know, build things up or tear things down, your human side is going to hold you back.
Right.
And be like, oh, okay.
And, you know, that's kind of like a commentary on like Superman, him and Lois Lane. Like,
Yeah.
this is like pushing 5,000, pushing it to, cranking it to 11. Like, if Superman never became Clark Kent again, or,
Right.
I know, him and Liz just had a falling out, or not Liz, him and Lois Lane just had a falling out. And, you know, those two are, you know, iconic.
Or if Superman
Fundamental,
says,
like falling out.
I'm going to change this entire world and I'm going to use my Kryptonian ideas.
Yeah. Right.
Humans would be sort of, you know, against that change. And maybe his Clark Kent side, I mean, he still allows humans to live their lives to an extent.
Yeah. He doesn't necessarily evil, but he is kind of, he's kind of discarding humanity
Right.
away. So yeah. Overall, what was your feelings of the book? Because this was the first time you've read Miracleman.
Yeah.
This was the first time I heard it as well. I just encountered it through people talking about it. When this was coming out as an omnibus and the amount of hype this was getting when it was getting collected, I was like, well, this would be a great book to read. Just experience what this is and what the history is. Because after jumping so many publishers, why is Alan Moore's name not on it?
Yeah.
So Alan Moore doesn't want anything to do with this book. He doesn't want anything written on it. They just put the original writer.
Yeah. He
The
doesn't
history
want
and
any
people like
royalties.
reviewing this is an Alan Moore book.
Yeah.
His like style is so
Like they
in the
know
book.
it.
Yeah, they know it. He just doesn't want his name on it anymore. And, you know, legal allegations aside, you know, it's a great story. I wish, but that he kind of feels that about way like people adapting his stuff now these days. He doesn't want to be a part of it.
Well, and I kind of see Alan Moore as like an actor that, like, you know, hey, I did that when I was younger, and you know what, I doesn't attach myself to it anymore. You know, so like a project he worked on, he's just like, yeah, I did that, fine.
Yep.
So he doesn't need to keep reliving all of that.
Exactly.
Maybe he just wants to do something else.
But
use his brain power somewhere else.
Exactly. Yes. He was one of the best writers in comic history, man. That's the thing. So when I seen this on the bookshelf, I'm like, we were talking to a couple Alan Moore books. I'm like, you know, Hey, you've never heard of this one, really? No. So I thought this would be a good new book to get exposed to and tell our audience about.
Yeah, and I don't even know, like when I was a kid, if I had seen anything Miracleman, which, this was around the time where I should have seen it. Maybe I did see it on the shelf. It just
Yeah,
didn't
and this
appeal
was
to me.
mostly a British comic too.
Yeah, that's true. So maybe it really wasn't in the comic
Yeah.
shops I was in, or maybe
Yeah.
it wasn't up front with all the other stuff.
Exactly.
Because there were always those side sections or piles somewhere of just sort of these, underground or, not name brand comics.
Exactly. Yep.
And at
Warrior
that time,
wouldn't have been Eclipse Comics that came after it. No, yeah.
yeah.
wouldn't have
I mean,
been.
I would have been more pulled to some of the
Mainstream.
DCs anyway.
That's fair.
Which is good. I didn't run into this maybe when I was 8 years old or 10 years old.
Right.
A little grown up for that. But my
your
take on it
Yeah.
is I think if you read it now and you compare it to some of the themes of modern comics and modern stories and even movies, it feels like a modern like it feels
Yeah.
like it's today, right?
Yes.
So to me, it was way ahead of its time, and that's where I give it the most props. Is that in the 80s, it was really written for like an early 2000s book. I mean, it was way ahead of its time. As far as like the talent that's around it and their ability to tell the story, I think it's spot on for Alan Moore. I mean, I've always liked his writing. I think he fleshed it out really well.
Yes.
He loses you at parts, but I think
That's
just
part of his
Alan
nature.
Moore,
Yeah, because he might
he
have a
goes off
concept. Yeah, he might have a concept that is very above our heads.
Yeah.
So it's very dense, very next level. Like he introduces this race of aliens called the Warp Smith, and he even created this little side story off of it. We read it, or we tried to read it. We couldn't really interpret what it was about. This Warp Smith culture. They're an alien they're a race of like high intelligent teleporters. Could I tell you anything more about that? Their costumes are cool.
Yeah.
I don't know what they were talking about.
Yeah.
But
he really.
so he was trying to explain this like culture, and you're like, well, okay, that's a little above my head. But
I feel like it was just two different stories. I
Right.
feel like the aliens were one story and the Miracleman was another. And I feel
Exactly.
like they were just
a little
he was
too much.
trying
Little-
to smash them both together, and it just didn't work in my mind.
Yep.
But I get I get that he was flexing two different muscles.
I think he could go back and rewrite that story today. Like
Yeah.
if you really wanted to, or somebody could like re-explain the origin of the two alien races that were involved in this book. I think they could really do a good job with it and kind of give it some modern sensibility of just cleaning it up a little bit.
Yeah. And on some of his writing, that's where I always really kind of, sometimes you sit back like, oh, that was really written well.
Yeah.
He really does stop you and it's like, wow, that is some great little, a
Yes.
tiny paragraph, like 20 words, and he does a great job of explaining.
Absolutely. He's the master of that.
Yeah.
Like him and like Neil Gaiman are really good at that.
Yes.
But sometimes when it's page after page of that, you start losing of the point of what they're going for.
Right.
That's some of the hard things about like the artist in their field. They're really excellent writers, but sometimes it's a little too dense.
Like even so Miracleman's walking down the street and he says, each evening I walk the airless battlements and scatter to the night's cold vectors the ashes of their unopened prayers.
That's
And
awesome.
you're like, geez, Alan Moore, it's just a comic. It's like-
But that's his style though
Right.
at this part, because he really wants to set a mood and a tone for it.
yeah. And you're like, holy cats, man. So that part of it, my take is I love his writing and I love diving into it. The artwork has taken me right out of it sometimes and just was like, ugh.
Right.
But that's okay because, you kind of pull back into the story. So I like reading and the art equally, and sometimes one overshadows the other. And
Sure.
this book just disjointed it a little more than usual. But the story, yes. The time frame, yes. The history of it, pretty cool to get into.
Yeah, what he's trying to say and the context to it and everything like that. I think it was, like we said, it was really groundbreaking.
Yeah.
He was really trying to go for some new concepts and not even just revitalize the character of Miracleman, but just break open all the barriers. Like, what can I do to push the envelope?
Yep.
What hasn't been seen before in a comic?
How can I take a naive character from the 50s and totally bring it down?
Yes, totally. Let's do it.
Alan
And
Moore,
I really like when people can find those niche characters to bring back to life for them. Otherwise, it's kind of stale all the time. If you keep getting the same Superman, Batman, Shazam stories all the time, there's no stirring the pot a little bit.
I mean, if he wrote this and everywhere you saw Miracleman was actually Superman,
right?
It would have been really kind of like you're trying too hard. But this character seemed to flow right into it.
Sure. And that's kind of funny we say that, because then he would go on to write or help write the Whatever Happened to the Man of Tomorrow.
Yeah.
And that was like one of the best Superman stories. The last one.
That one's good.
The last like classic one. That was huge. But yeah, I hope that, for readers out there, yes, this is a bit of a hard overall story to read. You can't get it digitally quite yet. You have to do some digging in the web for it, but you can still, the hardcovers, the single ones aren't too bad. They're still affordable. You can still get them on Amazon and stock trades and things like that. They just came out with this omnibus, the Miracleman Omnibus, in the fall of 2002. 2022. Sorry. And they just came out with this last fall, so it was a real awesome deep dive into the history, what the story was trying to say, and read something that was vertical but almost pre-vertical at the same time. So it was really cool to see some of Alan Moore's origins kind of come through.
Pre-vertigo.
We encourage you, if this is a mature book, again, if you haven't caught on to that, so take that with a grain of salt. But if you really just want to look into another example of like superhero deconstruction, this is definitely one to explore. Different from The Boys, but also just what kind of helped those stories get to where they are. And this has been another episode of Bam Pow Comic Hour. This is Andrew Launer
and Chris Ramos
signing off. Holy macaroni!
One more.